My heart is steadfast. Oh God, my heart is steadfast. I will sing and give praise. Awake, my glory, awake, lute and harp. I will awaken the dawn. I will praise you, O Lord, amongst the peoples. I will sing praises to you amongst the nations, for your mercy reaches to the heavens and your truth to the clouds. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be above the earth. Hannah also read the title of the psalm, which is Al-Tashith. And it simply means do not destroy. There are 4 psalms with this title. It's not only the title, but it's set to the tune of do not destroy. He's saying, Lord, don't destroy Saul. It's a milchem of David. That means it's a golden psalm, very precious to him. And the cave was a cave near the town of Adullam. If you want to read the story, and I suggest you should, you read it in 1 Samuel 22. Psalm 34 is also written by David about this period of darkness in his life. Now, there's a story behind the psalm. It involves a cave. It begins in a dark place, in a narrow place, but it ends above the heavens, praising God. That's what I love about the Psalms of David. He says it like it is. No holds barred. If he's going through a bad time, it's all out there. But it doesn't stay there. It always ends with praise to his God. This is the story. After the young David defeated Goliath, the Philistine giant, he became celebrated by the people of Israel. Saul took him into the palace, gave him his daughter Michal to marry. It's all going wonderfully for him. But David grew in stature, he grew in favor with God and also with the people. Saul started to get jealous of him. You see, David would lead the armies out to battle and they would defeat the enemies. The people made up a song. They said, Saul has slain his thousands. David his tens of thousands. He got even more jealous. His rage was so much that he tried to kill David on several occasions. But David had an ally in the palace. It was Jonathan, the son of Saul. They were soulmates. They loved each other. You know, in this age of virtual friends, it's good to have a real friend, isn't it? Good to have a real friend. Saul's jealous, but he's got an ally. Now try and understand the magnitude of the situation. Saul is worried about his livelihood. Young David had already been anointed as king in Saul's place by the prophet Samuel. And Saul is trying to eliminate that threat over his livelihood, over his kingship. So David has to leave the palace. He runs to Gath in the Philistine territory. They're not going to look for me here, he supposes. And when that place becomes unsafe for him, he heads off to the cave that's near the town of Adullam. We call it Adullam's cave. And there, men were drawn to David. His family got wind of where he was staying in the cave, and they came and stayed with him there. Other men, 400 men. If you were in the prayer meeting, Mike read or spoke about this chapter. What kind of men were they? Men that were in debt, men that were totally disillusioned with life, men that were just down on the inside, scoundrels, people fleeing from the law. You want that kind of friends around you, don't you? 400 people just like that gathered around David in the restrictions of that cave. And they became, or 30 of them became, David's mighty men. In other words, David's special forces. You know, David didn't do anything wrong. And yet there was a threat. Someone was trying to take his life. If he'd been a scoundrel, if he'd, done bad things to Saul and to the nation, that's one thing. But he hadn't. I recall when I was going to the senior school, I had to catch a bus. 2 buses to go to Dufferin. It was a long way away. And I remember one morning being with a crowd of people waiting for the bus, thought it was fun to call names to the firemen that were coming down the road in their big red truck. And that was kind of fun until the truck stopped opposite the bus stop, and all these big men with helmets and axes started chasing us. David hadn't done anything wrong, and yet he was pursued by Saul and his forces. In fact, Saul had 3,000 of his best men pursuing David. He was hiding in the cave with men in debt, discontented, and he became their commander. Read about it in 1 Samuel 22. The cave of Adullam became David's base of operations, where they learned how to fight. They learned how to stand as a company of soldiers. And he went from becoming like a fugitive in the wind from the law to a commander of 400 men. You know, God does so much in our lives when we're in a tight place. When we perceive that only bad things are happening. If we draw near to God in times like that, he does a work on the inside. Starts with trust. And these 400 men became something else. So he's at a low point in his life. He's hiding in a cave. His back's against the wall. It's dark. It's dank. It's wet. Probably smelly. And he says this, "Be merciful to me, O God. Be merciful to me." He repeats himself. I need your help, God. I need your help. Wasn't enough to say it once. Can you sense his desperation? Can you sense his emotion here? Danger is imminent. His need was so great. He repeats the request to God. God. And then he says, my soul, for my soul trusts in you. I don't think he's saying this to kind of emotionally blackmail the Lord into helping him. Not at all. He's stating a fact. I've got nobody else to help me against this vast array of soldiers trying to take my life. You're my help. My soul trusts in you. We sang about an overshadowing, haven't we? Oh, it's not working. Keith, could you? That's the one. My soul trusts in you. I take refuge in the shadow of your wings until the disaster has passed by. Sometimes the things we go through in life, we just want to kind of get our head down and hide until it all passes by. I love that verse in Luke, taking it right out of context, and it came to pass. Oh, hard times come. Hard times go. And he says, God, hide me under the shadow of your wings. What's that like? I remember walking through a field in Devon, and there was this little, it was a duckling, little duckling, yellow duckling, on its own, just kind of toddling through the field. And I looked around, no mother, no duck around, so I went to pick him up. And as he was kind of this height, out came this terrible noise from the hedge, and this massive killer duck with swords and flamethrowers, it just launched at me. I tell you what, it was scary. You've never been attacked by a duck, it's something else. You see, she was just trying to protect her young. And when God hides you under the shadow of his wings, what do you hear? You hear his heartbeat. And yes, it's a shadow, and yes, it could be a dark place where we can't see what's ahead of us sometimes. But it's a safe place. It's a safe place. Lord, Psalm 90, you've been our dwelling place in every generation. Lord, we're hiding in you. Our hiding place, we're making our home in the secret place of God, under the shadow of his wing. I love these words of Jesus recorded in Matthew 23. As he looks over Jerusalem, remember, Jesus is the Ancient of Days. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets, stones God's messengers. Oh, how often I've wanted to gather you in the same way a hen gathers her chicks, but you were unwilling. You wouldn't let me. Right there. That's the heart of Jesus for you, for me. He longs to gather us in to that safe place under the shadow of his wing. Verse 2, he says, I cry unto God Most High, to God who performs all things for me, or rather fulfills his purpose for me. Soars high, but God, he's most high. It doesn't matter how great and how powerful your oppressor or enemy might be, God is always higher than anybody else. And he cries out to God Most High, who's going to fulfill his purpose for him, come what may. And because God is sovereign over all his creation, David knew that nothing was going to thwart the purpose of God in his life, and your life, and my life. Nothing was going to prevent it. I cry unto God Most High, God who performs all things for me. He's going to carry out his plan for me. We read in Romans 8:28 and 29, don't we? We quote it to ourselves and to each other. All things are working together for good to those that love God, to those that are called according to his purpose. And kind of we think, well, we're going through this, but he's going to turn it around and it's going to get better. That's not really what the verse is saying. As you go into verse 29, what is the good? What is the good? Well, he tells us that we might be conformed to the image of his Son. So it's really saying whatever we go through, good, bad, ugly, indifferent, if we respond to God in faith, yes, he'll use that situation for our good, and we become more like Jesus. It's not, I lost 10 pounds, but God's going to give me 100. That's not what it's saying. All things do work together for good to those that love God, to those that are called according to his purpose. And God's at work in David's life and in your life and my life for his own glory and our good. I tell you, a subject worth studying is the sovereignty of God and the providence of God. Providence is a Latin word made up of two Latin words, pro video. Pro before video, to see. God's ability to see everything before it happens in our lives. And God governs all things. Men, leaders, all situations. He's in control. Let me say what Jerry Bridges says about the providence of God. And I quote, God's providence is his constant care for and his absolute rule over all his creation for his own glory and the good of his people. In other words, he writes, there are no coincidences. God's in control. He's saying all this, and then look what he says next. My soul is amongst lions. I lie amongst the sons of men who's set on fire, whose teeth are like spears and arrows. Their tongues are sharp swords. David's now describing how he feels, the situation as he perceives it happening in his life. You ever feel like that? You're really going through it. People aren't helping. In fact, they're saying bad things about you. David doesn't stay there. He transitions to praise after expressing his fear. And that's what we like about the Psalms. What you see is what you get. I'm so glad the Psalms are written, aren't you? He transitions. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. And then the immediacy of the situations comes back to his mind, and it's like he's kind of on a roller coaster or yo-yo going up and down emotionally. You're a bit like that. I'm a bit like that. Be in prayer, or a prayer meeting, praising God and having a wonderful time, and then your mind goes back to that situation that you're feeling. Only David speaks it out for us, for our good. This is what he says. They've prepared a net for my steps. My soul is bowed down. They've dug a pit before me. In the midst of it, they themselves have fallen. Back up in the heavens, be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. And then he says this, my heart is steadfast, O God. My heart is steadfast. My heart, I might be feeling it right now. I might be fearful. I don't know how it's going to pan out in the near future. But God, my heart is fixed on your promises, not on my situation. And therefore, I speak out to you, God. My heart is fixed on you. It's steadfast. It means that if we have a genuine faith, it can persist through all our circumstances, even through the worst of trials. In fact, King Saul, he doesn't get to decide my fate. God does. Your employer doesn't get to decide your fate, or your neighbor, or your family. God does. God determines his purpose for me. That's what he's saying. God has anointed me to become king. And one day I'm going to be the king. You know, if you read the story, David could have wiped out Saul. It's a kind of a funny story because Saul was looking for him and he wants to do a number 2. Didn't have toilets in those days, did they? So he goes into the cave. He doesn't know anybody's in the back there hiding. And while he's kind of doing his business and singing songs, David sneaks up and cuts a bit of his robe off. He could just as easily have wiped him out. But God is the God who performs all things for me. I can trust him to deliver what he said he's going to deliver. I haven't got to do it myself. This is here so that you and I can learn. When we want to just get revenge, when we want to kind of do it our way, we want to take shortcuts. It's here so we can learn. So God determines his purpose for me. The cave was dark. The situation was dire. God was the strength of David's life, and there would be a day coming in the future when he would be the king. And although David knew that his destiny, he calls it his glory, lay dormant, like it being at the end of winter, spring is coming, and it's all going to happen. And so he says, awake, my glory. I'll give thanks to you amongst the nations. I'll sing praises to you amongst the nations. I will awaken the dawn. Any of you good in the mornings? I like to get up as soon as I wake up. I can't lie in bed for the life of me. But he gets up, and it's still dark. He says, I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to awaken the dawn with praises to God. If you want out of a tight spot, awaken the dawn. Dawn is simply the first light at the beginning of a new day. We know that. You think, oh God, I'm in a dark place, and there might be light at the end of the tunnel. Don't wait for that to happen. Speak to the light. That's what David is saying. Speak to the light. Awaken the dawn. Listen to what the psalmist says in Psalm 89, verse 15. Blessed are the people who know the joyful sound. They walk, O Lord, in the light of your countenance, the light of your presence. See, what happens when we begin to praise and magnify the Lord above our grim situation? He comes. Who comes? The light of the world. Spirit of Jesus comes. Psalm 43, send forth your light. Send forth your light, he says. Send forth your truth. As we begin to worship God, light dawns. I'm going to get up while it's still dark, and I'm going to speak and sing to creation, praise the living God. Before the birds start to do it, I'm going to do it. While it's still dark, I'm going to awaken the dawn. I will praise you, O Lord, amongst the nations. I'll sing to you amongst the peoples. I'll sing to you amongst the nations, for your mercy reaches to the heavens. There's no roof on the cave right now. He's up there in the heavens praising God. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. He ends it with prophetic praise and worship. May our lives be just like that. Do you sense that there's something deep within you, some gift of God, some destiny of God that still lies dormant within you? It hasn't come to pass yet. Awaken the dawn. Speak out your destiny. Speak out your glory to the Lord. God's love, God's story is glorious. And you and I are part of God's story. You know that old cliche, history is simply his story. Well, it's true. It's all his story, and we've got a part to play in that glorious story. So he ends the psalm with prophetic praise and worship. I'm not going to be restricted for much longer. I'm going to praise you, O God, amongst the nations. This is going global. I'm going to praise you amongst the peoples. We might be feeling like David at the moment. You're in a dark place in your journey. And it feels like I'm kind of restricted. Sometimes even the people around me are like, oh, they're all in debt and they're all kind of all moaning and groaning. Know this, God has not finished with you and with me. He's got a story that he wants to tell through your life. And it's a glorious story.